Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal, and today my guest and I will be talking about haunted objects. You can find all episodes of the show, along with links to social media and other ways to contact me at the podcast page, and that is salcedo.paranormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions, or stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. And as always, you can support the show if you would like by either sharing it, or I also have a few other links where you can either buy my books, paranormal fiction and nonfiction, as well as links just for donations. So help is never expected, but always appreciated because there are expenses in making the show. Thank you all for listening, whether you make it for the live streams or you listen on the podcast feed or YouTube, or as of recently on the radio, basically online radio, the Troubled Minds Radio Network, KUAP-DB Digital Broadcasting, and that show, my shows air, just reruns of them, air every night at 6 p.m. Pacific or 9 p.m. Eastern, and they're basically on the hour before Troubled Minds comes on, when on those nights of the week that their show is on. So I want to thank again Mike for having me on the network. So yeah, I think that covers everything. So let me see here. This week there will be on Wednesday there will be a True Paranormal Stories from the Web show, just because to make the show or the week even as far as the shows we always do. Sometimes I switch them around when I have guests, just to make it easier for the guests to be on the show, because I always appreciate when anyone is able to join me. So, speaking of that, to talk about this topic with me tonight, I want to welcome back onto the show Jen from a newly renamed channel, and I'll let her tell you about that. Welcome onto the show again, Jen.
Hey, good to be here, James. Yep, I changed the name of my show. Before it was just the name, but I've changed it to The Arcane Observer. And so they can find that on YouTube. It's pretty much the first thing that pops up if you type that in the search box.
Yeah, great channel. I've listened to all the videos before, and great stuff as always. And I've been on one show, which is really amazing. The one time you had a live panel show was great, and yeah.
Yeah, so, hopefully we'll do that again, because that was fun. And I mostly just talk about kind of some paranormal things, a little bit of basically. It's kind of in the name. Like I think about what is going on in the occult world of, the normal world, what's going on beneath that, kind of, beyond the veil there, that's behind society all the time. So that's basically what my channel talks about.
Yes, yeah, definitely recommend it to everyone, and I'll be including a link to that in the episode description as well, so you all can check that out from there. And yeah, so Jen brought up this topic, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while, which is haunted objects. And it's something that you hear about here and there. Of course, we're going to start the show tonight with a couple of the most, I guess you could say, the most well-known objects in terms of, I would guess, popular culture, and then just if you get into the paranormal at all, you'll hear about these two, which are actually dolls, which we can talk about that in general as well once we get done with these two in particular. But yeah, I don't know, Jen, if you want to start going into why you were thinking about this topic, we can go from there.
Well, yeah, and of note, the different objects we're going to bring tonight with the haunted dolls. It seems like, especially these days in pop culture, through movies and everything, it's really been kind of visited upon about this. People are fascinated about the idea of an object being haunted, or getting a hold of some sort of relic in a way that they get, especially with the secondhand market as prolific as it is. People are selling a lot of things online these days. There are flea markets and everything. It seems to be like especially on the internet, you can get a hold of pretty much anything from any time period. And a lot of times when these things show up to people, when they open them up, they get them in the mail and they open them up. A lot of times I think that there's a unexpected kind of introduction with the object for some people. Like it feels like they've taken on almost like a roommate or something, like the object has an aura to it, like an energy field to it. And that might take them aback. In fact, and many of the haunted objects people have purposely pursued has affected not only themselves, but their pets. People who come into the house will notice the object immediately, or they'll not want to be around the object, or they'll be drawn to look at it, not just for the fact that it's interesting. It could be a very normal thing. But it seems like more and more people are aware that the things that we collect all the time may be taking on or carrying personality with them in some way, either that of the deceased or of the energy of the person who owned it before. Simply that alone, I think, would be enough to cause an object to seem haunted, or to change the environment it's placed in, or to change the people it comes in contact with.
Yeah, and that's a good lead into the first thing that came to mind when we started brainstorming this show was Robert the doll. And this is this whole doll. It started as it was a gift from. I've read two different reports as to who gifted it to the young boy, who was named Robert Eugene Otto. But he got this doll and he started carrying it with him everywhere for a while. And even though the boy's name was Robert, he liked to go by Eugene, and he called the doll Robert. And I'm wondering with that, and especially with so much attention to it given over the years by this boy as he grew up, if he didn't somehow give his own energy to it, maybe even making some kind of a thought form that he somehow placed in the doll without even realizing what he was doing.
Like a natural thought form.
Yeah, which could have caused the things that supposedly happened later on. Mm-hmm. So going over this information here, now I did just basically found a lot of articles. We're not going to have all the links to all those here in this episode description, because I think I found like 10 links just for this one doll. But the story is that he's made of, basically has a fabric face that's, of course, he's over 115 years old at this point, so he is slowly starting to break down. Also, my cat Logan says hello, so just jump down. But his eyes are basically black beads. He has a sailor suit, and let me see here. And also the sailor suit. Now, this is something in the article. I wonder. I haven't seen any other verification of this. It says that the sailor suit belonged to I guess to Eugene. I'm not sure about that part. But so let me see here. And then he has a toy. I hadn't heard about that. I knew about the doll itself, but I wasn't aware that he actually had his own toy. And some articles say it's a dog, some articles say it's a bear. But all the articles seem to agree that it's almost as disturbing as Robert the doll himself. I had never even heard of him having the toy of the toy having a toy of its own. So I thought that was odd as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just I think the idea that he got it as a child, and that was a gift to him, and for some reason he really latched onto this, and then giving it his own name, not the name he went by, but giving it his own name, it makes sense. But I think too, there's this emotional side that people don't really understand. I mean, a lot of times people have objects all around them all the time, but you look at the way that a child interacts with some of their toys and how they really, I mean, I remember even as a child definitely believing that, if my, if an older brother or something like that were to like beat up a stuffed animal of mine, I would say that you're hurting it. It would seem that way to me because kids, they do give a life, especially, when they're very little, that the object they haven't really figured out that the object, that they play with all the time or that they give a lot of their attention to, or perhaps that they've really latched onto and carry around with them all the time, like Robert Eugene Otto did here, that they, in that childhood innocence, like somehow the power of the fantasy of the how real or alive this doll was, and that somehow maybe it convinced the object itself, like you say, as a thought form forming within the energy field of the materials and everything, became to be imbued with some aspect of Eugene's personality. And then it began to take on more and more energy and emotion as the child growing up, put all of its energy into, or at least shared the energy with that object if he was in contact with it all the time. So I think that there's something, because adults don't do that very much. They don't have the same passion with material objects as much as children do, I think, unless, I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. And I think that might be the unique situation with a lot of these haunted objects, is people forming a bond with the material object.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and I do wonder about that. I hadn't thought about that before until doing the research for this. It was that it's some of his own energy, but I also wonder if you're putting energy into a doll like that, and it's sort of you're giving it to the doll. I wonder if that could also attract other energies, because Robert the doll itself is said to be more of a malevolent entity, or at least the entity that inhabits it is said to be more malevolent. And so I wonder if that's just maybe. I kind of look at it in two ways. Either it was whatever energy that Eugene put into it was maybe his negative energy without even knowing it, or
makes sense to lean on it for sure.
Yeah, and then also, but then if that, even if actually it could be both. If he did that, then why couldn't that draw in other negative energies or entities that could want to attach to it from there?
Right. Or that could have been in the environment at the time of the making of the doll, or observing the whole scenario. And two, a long time ago I had an experience with a Ouija board, real briefly. And there was a pretty good repertoire going on with the group I was working with, and we were doing the Ouija board sessions kind of on a regular. And we made a really, I mean, I didn't take this with a grain of salt, but the board said the entity or the personality, I'll say personality we were talking to, I asked where it was, and it said that it was in the television set. It was in the TV. And we all wondered, you know, and it said that it was something like the effect of, because everyone's always looking at it, because everybody was always paying attention to the TV. So it felt like it was also being paid attention to by being in the TV set. So it kind of followed.
Sorry, yeah, sort of modern day Ouija board, or closer to one without us even knowing it.
Right, as if, maybe some of these personalities or entities, for example, going to a child's doll or anything else that begins to take on a kind of a life of its own because the owner of the object holds it so carefully. That could happen with any object if the person, I think, is really attached to it, or gives it kind of a life, gives it an energy, sees it as a personality or an entity of its own self, and especially treats it that way, that it makes sense for it to become inhabited and be an ideal place, or not inhabited, at least be where a spirit or a personality disembodied in some way would try to associate itself with that object, or at least stay around with it, so it could experience what it, or have that kind of contact with a human being. It makes sense.
Right. Yeah, and that also part of maybe what leads to that, almost like a sign that that was the case is the way that Eugene's parents used to hear him talking to the doll, and then eventually they would hear what they thought was him responding to himself, but in a different voice. Now, of course, it's impossible to prove what was really happening, but if you consider, you know, even if it was his own voice, if he was being contacted by whatever was in the doll, it could have been working either through him or possibly projecting a voice out.
Well,
Now, either way.
Yes, because like in the story of the Witch of Endor, like it's one of the very first stories about a ghost, and it comes out of the Hebrew Bible. But at the same time, that the Witch of Endor was called an Ob, and what that is basically like a ventriloquist, where it's the idea of the spirit pitching its voice, kind of like a channeling of a way, pitching its voice into a host in a way. And so the person, like the Ob, the witch, is basically the microphone for the entity, or people hear the disembodied voice around the Ob. So like even if Robert Eugene, Robert Eugene, but the boy himself, if he was perhaps even sensitive, which most likely as a child, I mean every child is, and especially since I heard there was a bit of like voodoo involved in this too. But I mean, we don't have to go into that. But I heard that he was exposed to that in some way, maybe through his nan or something. But it's hard. It seems like if he himself was naturally predisposed to be able to be in contact with spirits, or like most children are probably, like most people can be if they're receptive to it or something. Or they're attempting to anyway, then it is possible that perhaps the spirit was either in the room with him, or it was using his energy field to speak, or it was speaking directly through him or something. I don't know. Yeah. It's really eerie though. Like it literally gave me goosebumps when you said that part about the parents listening in and, at first just hearing him talking to the empty air and then beginning to hear a response back is really eerie.
It is. It's almost more frightening in a way, or more scary in a way than the physical things that happen around the doll, which apparently there was other toys that were found that were ruined, and it was all attributed to the doll. Whenever anything bad would happen, the parents would basically tell Eugene that he shouldn't have done that, and he would say Robert did it. And
wow. Like he was jealous or something. Wanted the attention just solely on keep feeding me all this, attention.
Yeah, or something, or who knows how,
to get him in trouble, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But small toys are one thing, but then apparently there were also nights where the parents would wake up to hear Eugene crying because they would come in and they'd find all the furniture had been moved around the room and all towards Eugene's bed, which is that's a lot of energy to be moving furniture around.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. This is a very well. Go ahead, finish your thought there.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of energy to be doing that. If it's, I mean, the little dolls, like, because we always try to figure out what's really going on, and the little dolls could have maybe been Eugene, but if you're talking large furniture that has been moved around the room and all towards his bed in a short amount of time, it doesn't seem as likely that he could have staged it himself.
No. It seems like a much bigger thing, doesn't it? It begins to look like, I don't know, it seems like there must be a lot more put into the whole thing with this doll anyway. Makes you suspicious that there was something, I mean, the intent of it being, the gifting of it, what it was made for, the people being, what was their standing in society, all these different things. I mean, I don't understand, what was the mindset of these people because I mean, this sounds as if it was some kind of, not an accident. Doesn't sound like something that would accidentally happen. This doesn't usually happen. Even if a child does really lock onto like a toy or a doll, this is really unusual, I think. Either there was already a haunting present, or a disembodied spirit that was already on location or already with Robert Eugene for some reason, or with his family or with anyone in the household. Because for that to happen, I mean, and I don't know, you know, and just from things I've heard, like anyone else, but it does sound to actually have objects move around the room around this child. I mean, that's pretty. Never mind. Keep going. It's just kind of,
No
it's
problem.
just kind of like, oh my goodness, you know.
Yeah, and it was the other amazing thing is, according to what I found here, apparently, not only did Eugene's parents hear things, but there's a story in one of these articles here about a plumber who had been hired to make repairs around the house, and he was hearing children's laughter, although no one else was home at the time. And when he looked around the room, he noticed Robert the doll. And apparently, from the first time he had seen the doll to this time that he looked again, it had moved from one side of this window to another in this attic. And
right, that's so spooky.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the so and there were other objects that were moved as well, the things that have been in Robert's lap. So this is also, I think, probably important to point out. It's not like a tiny kid's doll. It was, I believe, almost as tall as Eugene was himself when he was little. So this is manipulation of objects just in short amounts of time. And so now you have this where it's this plumber. So you can't even really say that Eugene did this time because he wasn't even there. So that's a good sign that there's something going on there. Maybe that does lean towards the idea of there having already been something there in the house, and it just latched onto this doll. But then, kind of maybe it's just given more reason to just do stuff because it was already doing things, and here you have this other person. But yeah, so it wasn't just the family that experienced things.
Maybe there was already an entity there that was fairly powerful, but then it used like the energy of the child with this doll, which may have been a conduit. Like the doll was, maybe it was made in a certain way or with a certain intention of some kind for this. I mean, we don't know the background really, but the entity could have gotten stronger by being in contact with the child, and the child acting as a conduit for this raw imaginative energy that the entity could have fed off of to become stronger. The same way that many hauntings go, where the more attention paid to it, the stronger it becomes. So if the doll was the conduit for this type of thing, then it makes sense that the activity would increase because he is paying more attention to it. The same way, because I've heard it said in like a lot of different thoughts that, for example, in the East, like in Taoist magic, they say if you encounter a demon to initially just to pretend like you don't see it at all. Don't look at it at all and don't acknowledge it. And that's one of the first things to do, until you figure out what else to do. But I've heard it said that the initial first response should be just to not look at it, certainly, almost like a wild animal, not to look at it. And then I think a lot of people too who don't experience a lot of paranormal, it might be that they just don't pay attention to it at all. They just kind of have blinders up and they don't pay attention to it. But those who do have further experience are those who acknowledge it, begin to pay attention to it, take note of it, wait for signs of it, begin to see such things, and then it builds and it builds and it builds. And in this case, if there was already an entity on location, and then Robert is latched onto this doll, maybe by design even, then the child paying all that attention to that doll, and then it builds up this type of power, and then becomes almost an image of Robert himself. But then for a complete stranger to come into the house,
yeah,
and to zero in on this child's toy. I mean, as far as being the source of something strange, it's really weird.
It is. There's also been reports that different people over time have seen the doll's face change expressions, and I really wonder about that. Because to me, it seems like I almost feel like it'd be more likely that it was somehow the entity was sending images or thoughts to the person without them
Right.
realizing it than the actual fabric of the doll changing. Because that seems like, I mean, I could be wrong. That's
Agreed.
how I always think. But for it to actually change the material of the doll seems like it'd be harder to do, and then change it back again seems like it'd be a lot harder to do. But if you're just talking, energy directed at someone's mind or their own energy field, that seems possible because based on some of my own experiences, the first experience I ever had with seeing that older woman across the basement in my cousin's house,
Mhm.
when I'm extremely nearsighted. I shouldn't have seen anything except for a blur, but I could see detail.
Perhaps a lot of that's what's going on. Maybe people are not seeing a lot of the paranormal things they see. Maybe they're not necessarily seeing it with the same visual components that people see things normally. Maybe they are seeing on a different light wavelength, on some other different electromagnetic radiation level. Maybe that's where we're encountering a lot of the paranormal things we're seeing. I mean, it's conceivable. And maybe in this case, if the intelligence, this personality of whatever this doll was imbued with or whatever the entity was, maybe many times, or a lot of the paranormal things people encounter, perhaps the energy of the object or the being or whatever the case is, like you're saying, projecting into the person, and they seem to perceive it with their eyes, but they're just seeing it on some other wavelength of some type, even though it's, I mean, just as real and just as there, because a lot of this light is invisible light, as we know. But they are interacting with the physical field too. So they're breaking a lot of the, like I've heard it said, like, how can ghosts exist? How can they walk across a floor when there's just straight, when there's no weight or density, all these different types of talk. The way that they interact with the field around them is very suspicious to a lot of people, a lot of scientists, because it can't be replicated, this kind of thing. But what can be kind of used as a reference point is how you can have the same experiences at a location over the span of, like, say, 100-something years, even when the people experience it, say, in a haunted location, don't know each other, but experience the same phenomenon and can call the previous owner and they'll have similar story, a similar account of the location or of the object where the same thing happened. In that way, I think that's provable as far as, like, as scientific as you can get with it, because if it is a personality, which science doesn't even believe or give validation to a personality, they don't believe that there is a personality that exists inside of the human body besides the mind. There's just the mind and the firing electrons and so on and so forth, and the emotions, the inconsistency, yada. But the actual concept of a personality isn't even backed by science, but most people would believe in a personality. They would give animals personality, and everyone knows it's obvious that there is personality. So I see no reason that a personality could exist outside of a body, also in the case, and affect the environment around it, and possibly affect another, of human beings, the way that they're perceiving or projecting their own emotions, like a mirror onto that object, like in the case with this doll, where the person is seeing, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. And so I'll think I'll have a little more, and then we'll round out this talking about this one. But so also now, of course, Eugene eventually did grow up, but the doll stayed in the family for many years and with him until he passed. But through all those years, his wife basically had him put the doll in a room in the top of the house because
Wow.
it freaked her out. But there would be people outside that would say, when they'd be walking by the house, that they would see it moving in the window of the top floor, and that is amazing. So even after Eugene wasn't a kid anymore, I think maybe by then, whatever had been there with him had already just established itself. It had all the energy it needed, and to really keep doing things possibly. And it continued even after he passed, and it was transferred to a museum. And there are still reports from people today of having experiences, and especially with apparently you're not supposed to take a picture of the doll now, Robert the doll now, without mentioning it or trying to ask the doll first if you can take a picture of it, because according to the museum, people who have done that or who have made fun of the doll have had negative experiences after visiting the doll.
Like
And
it's become a little cursed almost even or something too.
exactly. So that goes beyond just, whatever happened before. It seems to there's still some energy or some entity, either way, in or around the doll that is apparently still causing activity today.
My goodness. Yeah, I mean, this account's really famous. I'm sure that everybody's heard of it. Really thinking about this, and giving it a second thought, it really makes you wonder about too. I mean, I brought up voodoo a little bit earlier. It almost sounds like the idea of the voodoo doll is that you create this object and then it's somehow linked to the person you want to affect in some way through concentration, and then you can do things to this voodoo doll, and in a way it might affect the person you intended to affect. It almost seems like, I don't know, like this, like a living voodoo doll or something. You know what I mean? Like it becomes, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one part I mentioned earlier about the sort of the two different accounts of how he got the doll. One is that his grandfather gave it to him, and it was actually not originally meant to be a doll that was played with. It was supposed to be like part of a window display for a store. Um, and like almost for like a clown doll collection, which is also odd because anyone that looks into the paranormal or is into horror knows clowns are pretty well known for being horrifying in a lot of cases. But also, the other version of the story is that a servant from, I forget now what part of the world, but a part of the world where I think it was Haiti, I forget now, but some part of the world where they did practice voodoo is the one they gave the doll, or at least handled the doll before they gave it to Robert, or to Eugene, I mean. So there is that possibility, I guess, as well.
Or even what was said, like for example, if you tell somebody and you give them something, if there's some type of story with it or
Right.
something very serious with it that works on the mind, and especially the impressionable mind of a child, you know, what the effect could be of making it real, very real to the child. And then if the child begins to treat it like it's a real living thing, and then it can go on as far as trying to wrap your mind around it. But I mean, in this case right here, I think it's just a glimpse into one of the many objects with these types of stories around it, which I think we should really consider the type of things we bring into our home and our environment, and the things and the effect we have with those objects, or the intent we have when we're handling them, or knowing where they've come from. I heard that a long time ago people wouldn't wear secondhand clothes. They wouldn't wear the clothes of a dead person. They wouldn't wear the clothes that somebody else had worn for these very reasons. There's some superstition about a lot of this. So that we don't have today anymore. And I don't know, maybe there's something to be gleaned from all that old knowledge. Perhaps.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard a couple of stories about people that have gotten clothes or shoes or different things and then had their personality change for the time that they were wearing the clothes, and then they had eventually get rid of them because it was just not them. It wasn't even necessarily like a negative personality, but it was still they would act in different ways or have different thoughts that did not make sense to them as being their own thoughts. And
Right.
so they've had to get rid of it. So that's something that, yeah, that I think there's plenty to that as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the idea of like, say you go to a yard sale and you pick up, say a lady picks up a dress and then picks up a rocking chair. And she goes home and she's happy with those things. And she puts on the dress and she sits in the rocking chair. And then she begins to like obsessively do some of the things the previous owner of those objects used to do. Because it's like the Dr. Seuss book with the pants that are running around with nobody in them. Like, I don't know. It does make you wonder about the objects we keep around us all the time. And the same, if you think, I don't know, it is worth thinking about much more than I think it's interesting.
Yeah, well, that's sort of because I figured, like, a lot of people have I'd heard of Robert the Doll before, but I'd never really put a lot of thought into it. And so that's why I thought this would be fun to do that. So, yeah, I think,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, yeah, so that was fun. And then, of course, one of the other most famous dolls now, especially thanks to, I mean, I did hear that there were some movies made about Robert, but I don't think those became nearly as popular as the ones made about Annabelle. And
Right.
in the association with the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now that's a whole other show.
I know.
Talking about
We
the
got so
Warrens.
into Robert the Doll. Like we were talking about that. And then
Yeah.
to get to talking about the Annabelle things, like it seems like it should be like its own little segment too, because it is this, and I hope we can go. I mean, there are so many objects. I hope, and I think we're planning on kind of doing this off and on and visiting a lot of these haunted objects. It's very fun to talk about with you.
Yeah, well, what we could do is save Annabelle for next time and make it a sort of a combination show with Annabelle and the Warrens.
Yeah, that is a good idea. I mean, and we didn't intend to do that, but that is a good idea
No.
because it was kind of just all the stories about Robert the Doll itself. And I've also heard too another thing about Robert the Doll. You reminded me of when he was in the museum. I heard that I remember watching something. I can't remember what it was, and I remember hearing that the museum for some reason flooded.
Yeah,
And did you hear this story?
I did.
About,
I didn't see it in any of what I was looked up, but I heard that it did flood, but then there was some kind of a storm that went through the
yeah,
area. It flooded, and yeah, but then when everyone came to look through the place and figure out what had to be done, Robert was up in like the rafters or like near the ceiling
that's what
of
they
the
say.
museum.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I believe them because I mean, why would they make that up? You know, I guess
Yeah,
they could, but I wonder how. I mean, and I think that after that, then they begin to. I don't know if he was already in a glass case. I think he was. I don't remember if he was, because see, it's either kind of wonderful or like a wonderful story because he was somehow in a glass case and got out of it, or after that they put him in a glass case to keep such things from happening. So either way, it's really bizarre. But he's moving around. But that's kind of in the Annabelle story too. But
yeah,
that goes to demons too. People saying that demons will move objects around to draw attention to them. So it's not really that the object's possessed per se, but that the demon is moving the object around, that the words we're talking about. But that is kind of a whole other topic because Annabelle's associated with like a demonic entity of sorts. Kind of spooky too.
right. I think maybe just a general discussion of because I mean you think of dolls and especially older dolls. Well, there's a whole other thing with antiques in general. You hear so many stories about people bringing things home that they found that, like you mentioned, a yard sale or an antique store. People even going to antique stores who are sensitive will say, "Oh, I feel this near this object," and
Right.
I think I believe in that.
Or even coming home
Yeah.
with an attachment from
Yep.
an antique store. Yep.
Yeah. So, especially with I think I've talked about this before in different shows. Actually, I think I did a show about this with Michael Strange over on Troubled Minds regarding mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those things, I think, especially the older ones. So, I my parents they divorced when I was little, and they both eventually got married to different people, and so at my house where my dad and then stepmom was at, I would stay in this. It was the guest room, but it was also had some storage and things in it. And there was for a time there were two mirrors that my at the time was my stepmom had, and they were sitting across from each other.
Ooh. Yeah.
And I wasn't into the paranormal at that time. It was back when I was like a teenager, but I never I always made sure I got past those two mirrors as fast as I could.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of lore about that, and there's a lot of just general creepiness about it. And I think, yeah, I have a few stories of my own about the mirror thing. So there's a lot that, I mean, for us to talk about, for anyone to think about.
Yeah, so maybe that's gonna be another show. We are gonna do like a series of these shows here and there whenever we have the time and everything. And but yeah, I it's amazing how many objects. But now, like, it's funny because I do think the age of the item and the history of the item, especially the history of the item, is important because like I don't get that same feeling from mirrors that you get like at a modern store as much as I get from older mirrors or older objects or even like cabinets. Like I have this one cabinet. My family calls it a hutch. I think that's another name for it, and it belonged to my great grandparents. And there's some times where it does give off some kind of an energy, not negative, but just like a presence that's there from it that I can feel.
Right.
And I don't know if it's residual from them or, if it's from before. I mean, they had it for many years. So I do think.
You say like is it kind of like you suddenly notice that it's as if the object is noticing you in a way?
Yeah,
Like,
I think sometimes. Yeah.
where it feels
Yeah.
like you're drawn to notice it because it's almost like the room's not empty anymore, as if someone's there. But it seems to be coming from the object. Like the object is almost like a dog sitting in there or something, you know what I mean? Like, or a cat.
Yeah.
Like
And it doesn't.
more.
It's been a long time since I've had that feeling. So now I do wonder if it was more of a residual thing. Because I was just thinking about that. I haven't had that really strong feeling from it for many years now, but I wonder if it was some kind of connection to my great grandparents because they did they both had passed away some years ago, but then that feeling, actually, yeah, now that I think about it, that feeling didn't start until after they had passed. And
I had
ended not long after. Go ahead.
oh no, just along the same thing. But I bought a bed that was an antique bed, and it was, I don't know, I think it was from the mattress tag. It was like brand new mattress. So it was like this. It was an old bed, but it was like been in a guest room, hadn't ever been used, that sort of thing, or had hardly been used. And I remember the mattress tag said like, I can't remember if it was like 72, 1970, something like that. It was like late 60s or the early 70s, and the bed itself was like just really cool. It was all wood and it was carved and it was really interesting, and that's why I got in it, and I got in a really good deal on it. It was years ago, and the mattress was really firm, but I kind of don't mind if I'm a firm mattress. But I remember the very first night that I laid in it and tried to sleep in it, it was impossible. Like it was so weird, just so weird. I ended up selling that bed for nothing, like for next to nothing. But I told them it was it's an old bed, and I didn't tell them that I thought there was something creepy about it, of course, because you can't verify that. But it was really, I've had that happen too. I had gotten a wardrobe, an old antique wardrobe, same type of thing you're talking about, and on for the very first night that it was in everything's quiet and you're kind of settled in with the objects, that's when, and you're kind of in that state. Some would say it's just because it's a new object, but there are all kinds of new objects I bring into my home and people bring into their homes all the time. So, and these particular ones, there's something different about them, and they disturb the I don't know, there's a kind of you have a suspicious feeling in the presence of them or something. I think that people do have a natural awareness of them, and it seems like you bring the energy of where it had been. Like you know, it's really creepy, really.
Yeah, I have a funny story about my dining room. I don't really have a dining room, but my dining room table. um, so I got it from my grandparents, and so I don't know, about 5 years ago or so. At one point, I started hearing, just every once in a while, I'd hear like a knock on the table, like someone just took their fist and knocked on it. And I thought, oh, that's odd. And it kept happening here and there. Well, this one day, my family came over, and they said, "Hey, it looks like your table is really loose. Needs to be like the joints or whatever need to be everything needs to be like tightened up." And I was like, "Oh yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I've been hearing knocks on it lately." And so a friend of the family went and looked at it, and like I don't know any of the terms of how like woodworking and all that works, but he basically like checked it over and did some things, and and then after that was done, I never heard another knock on that table.
That's weird. And,
It's
I had
like, yeah, it's like my it's like possibly what I think is maybe my grandfather who had passed years ago. I wonder in a way if he was like trying to get my attention to get the table fixed, but I just
fix
had
this
no
table.
idea
Yeah,
that
could be.
like that was even a thing that could be done or had to be done. And and but yeah, after that was taken care of, there hasn't been a knock on that thing since. And it's not like a creak. Like sometimes the table will just creak from whatever air pressure or whatever, and little
Right.
things like that. I know the difference in the sounds, especially with my ears. I know the difference. These were knocks, and never happened again.
Right. No,
So,
I've heard of a case. There was in one of the old towns I used to live in. There was a hotel, and there was this prominent man in that town who owned several of these hotels, and he was kind of famous. There was even like a little statue they made for him, but they named these hotels after him. He had owned those, and so on and so forth. And in the banquet area, or like the lobby area, there was this particular chair that was his chair. It's really weird. Like it was his special chair to sit in and that sort of thing.
mm,
And people who worked there weren't allowed to sit in that chair. And it makes me wonder if objects like that, for example, begin to get a type of energy to them due to that sort of thing as well. And then as far as personal haunted objects, I've had instances where, like one prominent thing that sticks out in my mind is that I moved into this house and the house was, so it's kind of a haunting story in a little bit, but it's real quick. The house, for one thing, the old man who had lived there had been murdered. He had been attacked by the neighbors, had come over to use the phone,
mm,
and they had hit him over the back of his like hit him and knocked him down, and then he had later succumbed to that injury because he was very elderly. And I didn't know that story when I moved in, but it was a very decrepit. The house was in it was in pretty bad shape, and he had like a where he had collected lots of newspapers and popular mechanics, and there were all these magazines everywhere, and a lot of his stuff was still in the house, and I had gotten a really good deal to move into the house. The rent was very low and things like that, and I tore out the wallpaper because and it's neither here nor there, but he was a smoker, so there was it was yellow on the walls and all this sort of thing, and he was just an elderly man, and there was a lot of work to be done, so I did a lot of that work in cleaning it up, tearing stuff out, tearing out carpet, yada. And that very same day, that very first day that I was working in the house, that there was a cat there. That was apparently his cat, and its name was Jumper. And it was this very old cat, and it was missing a part of its ear, and it was just this raggedy, been through the ringer type of cat, indoor,
mm.
outdoor. Well, it was mean too. There was a table in the kitchen, and like he popped into the house and was laying on the table, and I went to kind of move him off the table because I just moved in, and I really didn't know the story with this cat. And I've heard it from later on. I heard about it from the neighbors and this, that, and the other, but it was his cat. And I went to kind of kind of, move it off the kitchen table. But the table had come with the house. It was all still in there. And he I remember him kind of low growling at me, and I was like, okay, well, I was like, I guess you come with the house like all the way, and just kind of do whatever you want. And so I let him just kind of do whatever he wanted to. And he came and went, and I would put food out. But he was just this kind of grumpy old cat, and he just did whatever he wanted. But, a problem I began having, I cleaned out all the cabinets and everything. There was stuff in the cabinets in the kitchen. And the back door kept coming open and coming open and coming open. I thought somebody was coming into the house while I was gone to work. So I'd lock it, and the door would come open. But I didn't know if somebody had a key to it or something like that. Who knows?
Right.
So I put like a butter knife at the very top of the door to try to wedge the door shut. And that way, it's kind of a trick to keep the door shut, even if it,
Yeah.
And I came home, and the door was open again, and the butter knife was on the floor. And I didn't think anything, I mean, because it had been happening and happening and happening. And it only happened like probably 3, I'm saying happening, but it probably happened like 4 times. That's enough for a person to really notice it. That was enough for me to be like, this is weird. But that evening, I was getting stuff ready to make, my dinner. And I opened up the cabinet door, and there was a tooth on the shelf, a human tooth.
Oh, wonderful.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah.
And I took that tooth, and I put it in like a coffee can, and I got some Saints coins and buried it. I did all this careful stuff because I was like, I don't know what is going on. But that house, it was very strange, and it was like as if it was a haunted house, but it seemed like I don't even know what was going on with that. It was just a strange scenario, kind of a haunted object story, but not quite, I guess. But just how the animal, everything seemed to be just still imbued with him 100%. And then on the other scope of it, I mean, it goes on and on about the way that somehow the personality of people imprints its surrounding. And I think we don't notice it as much in the modern day because it's kind of a throwaway thing where people throw things away all the time. They get new stuff.
Right.
They don't really bond to the objects anymore as much, maybe as they used to when they couldn't get things as easily. And maybe there's something to do with that too.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, how, in a way, like you said, houses or buildings, I mean, they're places, but they're also objects. It's all material. And
Yeah.
I've talked about this before recently, but my front door will unlock or lock on its own sometimes.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say about that house. It was like
Yeah.
it was somebody had a key to it or something, but I mean, it didn't happen after that tooth thing. It didn't happen anymore. It was very strange. Yeah.
Well, with mine, my front door, I'll have it unlocked because I'm going to have company come over, my family, and so I'll have it unlocked. I'll make sure it's unlocked, and I'll be sitting in here in the living room. And they'll get here and they'll knock, and I'll say, come on in, it's unlocked. And they'll go turn the doorknob, and it's locked again. And I was here the whole time, and never heard anything. And other times I'll be here because I'm here at home a lot, and so other times I'll have the door locked while I'm here, and I'll go to open it to do something, and it'll be unlocked. And again, no sounds, no visitors from anyone. And it just does that. So I wonder about that too. It's some kind of manipulation there, and it's not like it's whatever it does it slow enough where it doesn't make any noise. So, yeah, that is odd. But yeah, I think that's maybe a good place to stop. Otherwise, we could be here for another hour talking about the Annabelle and the Warrens and all that.
Yes, it is getting late. I need to get some things around, I guess. But it is fun to talk about, and yeah, there's still a lot more to talk about. So we'll get to it.
Yeah, well, thank you again for being on the show with me, and again, we'll do this again next time we can, and go from there. So, thank you again for everything.
Yes, have a great night. Talk to you soon.
Yep. So, but yeah, so that's it for this show, and I will be back tomorrow to cover paranormal news on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Take care.